In the heart of ancient Egypt, the golden sun rose over the banks of the Nile, illuminating a land of contrasts and mysteries. The calm waters reflected the blue sky, while palm trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. It was a land of abundance, of grand culture, of temples and pyramids that touched the horizon. But it was also a land of oppression for a people who had lived there for generations, the children of Israel. The descendants of Jacob had arrived in Egypt many years before, guided by the hope of survival in times of famine. They were well received, for Joseph, one of Jacob's sons, had earned the Pharaoh's trust and saved Egypt from scarcity. For a long time, the Hebrews prospered, multiplied, and occupied the fertile lands of Goshen, living in peace and harmony, grateful for the hospitality and blessings they had received. As the years passed, however, generations succeeded one another, and a new Pharaoh took the throne of Egypt. He did not know Joseph's story, nor did he care about the gratitude of the former rulers. Observing the growth of the Hebrew people, he felt threatened. He feared that, in the event of war, the Hebrews would join Egypt's enemies and flee the land, taking with them their strength and labor. Thus, Pharaoh's heart hardened, and he decided to turn the Hebrews into servants. Imposing heavy labor and endless days under the scorching sun, the Hebrews built cities, raised brick walls, carried stones, and erected storehouses for Pharaoh. Their days were marked by exhaustion, their nights by the hope of relief. Even under oppression, the people continued to grow. Life flourished. Among the tents, and children ran between the flax fields, dreaming of freedom. Pharaoh, increasingly fearful, ordered the overseers to be harsher, to increase the suffering, but even so, he could not stop the growth of that resilient people. Pharaoh's anguish grew even greater, and he made a terrible decision. He commanded that all newborn Hebrew boys be thrown into the Nile while the girls could live. The cries of mothers echoed among the mud houses, and sorrow spread like a shadow over Goshen. Still, there was faith, there was hope. There was the certainty that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would not abandon his people. Amid this scene of pain and resistance, families grew stronger, bonds of solidarity were formed, and the stories of the ancestors were told around the campfires. The elders remembered Joseph's dreams, the promises made by God, and taught the young that hope should not die. Even in the darkest days, the Hebrew people, even when subjugated, kept their identity alive. Their customs, their language, their traditions were preserved, passed from generation to generation like an invisible treasure. The women wove baskets and prepared bread. The men cared for the flocks and crops. And together, everyone offered silent prayers for deliverance, while Egypt celebrated festivals and rituals in honor of its gods. The Hebrews looked up at the starry sky and remembered the promises made to Abraham that they would become a great nation, that they would inherit a land of peace and prosperity. Each star was a reminder that God's timing is not man's timing, but that faithfulness would never be forgotten. On silent nights, Mothers lulled their children with ancient songs, whispering words of courage and faith. The elders gathered, the young to tell them about their ancestors' journey, about the covenant made in the past, about the hope for a different future. The people united in pain, but also in hope. Oppression, no matter how harsh, could not extinguish the flame of faith. The Hebrew people endured day after day with courage and dignity. Their calloused hands were witnesses to hard work, but their eyes shone with the certainty that their story would not end there under Pharaoh's yoke. While Egypt slept, dreams of freedom traveled through the tents of Goshen. Dreams of a people longing for justice, for dignity, for a new beginning. And in the silence of the dawn, when all seemed lost, an ancient promise echoed in their hearts. God does not forget his children. Thus begins the story of Moses, a story of courage and faith, of challenges and miracles, of a people who, even in the face of the greatest adversity, never stopped believing that freedom was possible. Amid oppression and suffering, hope blossomed, awaiting the moment when God would raise up a deliverer, someone capable of leading his people beyond the banks of the Nile toward the promised land. Egypt, with all its glory and power, did not know that among the Hebrews, a boy would be born destined to change the fate of a nation. A boy who, protected by the love of his family and by the hand of God, would become the instrument of liberation for an entire people. The story of Moses was about to begin, and with it, a new era of hope and faith for all who believe in the strength of dreams and the faithfulness of divine promises. Chapter 2: The Birth of Moses in the Heart of Egypt. Among the humble homes of the Hebrews, there was a climate of tension and hope. The people suffered, but they resisted. Among them lived a family of faith. Amram and Jochebed were loving parents, always vigilant to the dangers lurking at every corner. The Pharaoh's decree echoed as a constant threat. No Hebrew boy could survive. All were to be cast into the Nile. Even so, life insisted on blooming. Jochebed felt the pains of childbirth in silence. Fear did not erase the joy of seeing her newborn son's face. He was a strong boy with bright eyes who seemed to carry a promise. The couple decided to hide him, protecting him from Egyptian eyes. The days dragged on in secrecy, the baby wrapped in blankets, his cries muffled by his mother's care. Miriam, the older sister, helped with everything, always alert to the slightest sign of danger. Time passed, and the baby grew. His cries became louder, harder to hide. Jochebed knew she could not protect him much longer. With a heavy heart, she made a painful decision. She prepared a basket of reeds, sealed the gaps with tar and pitch, making it waterproof. With trembling hands, she placed the baby inside, adjusted the blanket, and kissed his forehead. Miriam watched everything, her eyes brimming with tears, trying to be brave. The next morning, Jochebed walked to the banks of the Nile. The sun reflected on the calm waters, but her heart was a storm. Gently, she placed the basket among the reeds, entrusting her son to God's care. Miriam hid among the plants, watching from a distance, every muscle tense, every breath held. Time seemed suspended. The basket rocked gently, carried by the current until footsteps approached. It was Pharaoh's daughter, accompanied by her servants. She spotted the basket and asked them to bring it to her. Opening the lid, she found the baby crying. The princess's eyes filled with compassion. She recognized he was a Hebrew boy, but instead of fear or disdain, she felt tenderness. She decided, right then, to raise him as her own son. Miriam, seeing this, took a deep breath and approached. With courage, she suggested to the princess that a Hebrew nurse could care for the baby. Pharaoh's daughter agreed, and Miriam ran. To fetch Jochebed, the reunion was silent, but full of meaning. Jochebed could hold her son again, now under the palace's protection. She nursed him, cradled him, whispered promises of love and hope. When the boy grew a little, Jochebed brought him to the palace. Pharaoh's daughter received him with joy and named him Moses, for he was drawn out of the water. The Hebrew boy began to live among the Egyptians, surrounded by luxury and education, but his story bore deep marks. Jochebed's heart was full of gratitude and longing, knowing her son was safe but far away. Moses grew under watchful eyes. He was different, but no one dared question the princess's decision. The palace was a world of gold and marble, blooming gardens and crystal fountains. Moses learned the Egyptian language, their customs, sciences, and the art of war. But deep down, he carried the blood and memory of his people. Moses' destiny seemed woven by invisible hands, intertwining suffering and hope, fear and courage. Meanwhile, the Hebrew people continued to suffer. Forced labor did not cease, tears mixed with the mud of bricks. Yet, among mothers and fathers, stories were whispered about a boy saved from the waters, a sign that God had not forgotten his people. The name Moses began to be murmured in prayers. As a promise of deliverance, in the palace, Moses grew, surrounded by privilege, but with a divided heart. Each birthday, each lesson learned, a silent question echoed in his mind. Who am I, after all? Son of the princess, or son of the enslaved people? The answer would come with time, guided by hands that weave destinies with threads of hope. Thus, the boy drawn from the water became a symbol of hope for an entire people. Egypt continued its course, but on the banks of the Nile, a story of courage and faith was beginning to be written. Moses' time had not yet come, but his name was already a seed of freedom planted in the hearts of the Hebrews. Chapter 3. Moses discovers his origins. Moses grew up surrounded by the luxury and discipline of the Egyptian palace. He was called by the name given by Pharaoh's daughter, educated among princes, walking beneath towering columns, admiring golden statues and lush gardens. From a young age, he learned to read and write in hieroglyphs, to decipher maps, and to listen to stories about the gods of Egypt. He moved through marble corridors, hearing the music of harps and flutes echoing in the halls. Yet, despite all the splendor, Moses felt a quiet emptiness inside. There was something in his heart that didn't fit, an unease that grew stronger each day. He noticed he was different. The shape of his face, the tone of his skin, the brightness of his eyes, everything set him subtly apart from the other young men in the palace. As a child, he asked his adoptive mother about his origins, but her answers were always wrapped in tenderness and mystery. It was as if a part of his story was locked away, protected by a silence no one dared to break. Moses grew up with unanswered questions, feeling he belonged to two worlds. And yet to neither. As the years passed, Moses began to pay more attention to the people who worked in Egypt's fields and construction sites. He saw Hebrew men and women carrying bricks, mixing clay, building cities under the scorching sun. He saw children running between simple houses, mothers shielding their sons, fathers trying to hold on to dignity despite oppression. The Hebrews spoke a different language, sang sad songs, and looked to the sky for hope. Moses felt a strange connection with them, as if he shared their pain, though he did not yet understand why. One day, while walking near the palace, Moses encountered Miriam, his sister by blood, now grown and working among the servants. She looked at him in a special way, as if recognizing an ancient secret. They exchanged few words, but Miriam's gaze said more than any explanation. Moses felt his heart tighten, as if a truth was about to be revealed. That night, he lay awake, recalling fragments of his childhood, the face of a woman who cradled him with tenderness, the sound of a song different from those sung in the palace. The next day, Moses left the golden walls and walked through the streets of Ramses. He wanted to see the Hebrew people up close, to understand their pain, to feel the weight of oppression. The sun blazed, casting long shadows over the mud brick houses. The air was thick with the smells of sweat, dust, and baking bread. Moses walked among the workers, observing their efforts, the whip marks on their backs, their tired but hopeful eyes. He felt a deep compassion, as if their suffering was also his own. While watching, he witnessed a scene that would change his life forever. An Egyptian overseer shouted at a Hebrew slave, pushing him to the ground and raising his whip with cruelty. The Hebrew, exhausted, tried to protect himself but had no strength left. Moses could not bear it. He rushed forward, blood boiling in his veins. In a moment of impulse, he intervened. He fought with the Egyptian, and in the heat of the struggle, ended up taking the man's life. The overseer fell lifeless in the sand, and Moses, breathless, looked around. Fear seized his body. He buried the body in the sand, his hands trembling, his heart pounding. He returned to the palace, but the weight of the secret followed him like a shadow. The next morning, Moses went out again and saw two Hebrews arguing. He tried to intervene, urging peace between brothers, but one of them recognized him. "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Will you kill me? as you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" The words echoed like thunder. Moses realized his act was no longer hidden. Fear turned to desperation. The rumor reached Pharaoh's ears, who became furious upon learning that Moses, raised as his own grandson, had betrayed Egypt. Now, Moses was seen as a traitor, a threat to the throne. The palace, once a refuge, became a prison. There was no safe place left. One silent night, Moses left everything behind. He slipped away in the shadows, carrying only memories of childhood and the hope of a new beginning. The journey across the desert was long and lonely. The heat of the day and the chill of the night tested his strength. Moses thought of his mother, of Miriam, of the people he had left behind. He felt longing, guilt, and fear. But above all, he sensed his story was not yet finished. Something greater awaited him, something he could not yet understand. During the journey, Moses faced hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. Each step was a challenge, each night a battle against loneliness. He remembered stories Miriam had told him, the promises made to the Hebrew people, the hope of deliverance. The desert seemed endless, but Moses pressed on, guided by an invisible force. In his heart, a certainty grew that he was not alone, that there was a greater purpose for his life at last. Moses reached the land of Midian, a weary and aimless stranger. He sat by a well, seeking rest and relief. The past seemed distant, but the marks on his heart were deep. There, among the sands and mountains, Moses would begin a new chapter of his life. Not knowing that destiny was preparing him for something extraordinary, Egypt continued on its course. The Hebrews still suffered under the weight of oppression, but a seed had been planted. Moses, the boy drawn from the waters, was now a man in search of answers. His time of silence and learning was just beginning. Chapter 4. Life in Midian. The desert was a place of silence and solitude, where the wind sculpted the dunes and the sky stretched endlessly above. For Moses, it was both exile and refuge. Each step away from Egypt was a step toward the unknown, but also a step away from guilt and fear. The memories of the palace, of his family, of the people he had left behind swirled in his mind like the desert sand. He was a fugitive, but also a man searching for meaning. After days of wandering, his feet blistered and his lips cracked from thirst, Moses finally saw a patch of green on the horizon. It was an oasis, a promise of relief. He approached slowly, knees weak, and found a well surrounded by a few trees. The coolness of the water revived him, and he sat by the well, letting the peace of the place wash over him. For the first time in many days, Moses allowed himself to rest as he sat there. A group of 7 women approached, leading their father's flock to the well. Their laughter and chatter filled the air, a sound of life in the midst of barrenness. But soon the mood changed. Rough shepherds arrived, pushing the women aside, intent on watering their own flocks first. Moses watched the scene unfold, and something inside him stirred. Though weary, he could not ignore injustice. He stood up, confronted the shepherds, and defended the women. His presence and determination were enough to drive the men away. Grateful, the women quickly watered their flock and returned home earlier than usual. Their father, Jethro, a respected priest of Midian, was surprised to see them so soon. When he learned of the stranger who had helped them, he sent for Moses, inviting him to share a meal. Moses entered Jethro's tent as a stranger, but was welcomed as a guest. The warmth of the family, the simple meal, and the sense of belonging were a balm to his weary soul. Days turned into weeks, and Moses found himself staying with Jethro's family. He learned the rhythms of desert life, how to tend sheep, how to find water, how to read the sky for signs of weather. The palace life faded into memory, replaced by the honest work of a shepherd. Moses found peace in the simplicity, in the quiet moments under the stars, in the laughter around the fire. He was no longer a prince, but he was no longer lost. Jethro saw in Moses a man of integrity and strength. In time, he offered his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. The wedding was humble, but filled with joy. Zipporah was wise and kind, a partner who shared his burdens and dreams. Together, they built a life, and soon their son Gershom was born. Moses named him so, saying, "I have become a foreigner in a foreign land." Yet, with his family and flock, Moses began to feel at home. Years passed. Moses' hair grew longer, his face more lined by sun and wind. He became known among the Midianites as a fair and dependable man. Yet, deep in his heart, he often gazed at the horizon, wondering about the people he had left behind. He remembered the stories of his ancestors, the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, he would pray, "Skaz, if there was still a purpose for him beyond the desert." One day, as Moses led his flock beyond the usual pastures, he came to the foot of Mount Horeb, known as the Mountain of God. The air was different there, charged with a quiet power. Suddenly, he noticed a bush on fire, its flames bright and fierce, yet the bush itself was not consumed. Moses drew closer, curiosity and awe mingling in his chest. Then, a voice called his name, gentle yet commanding. "Moses, Moses." T answered, "Here I am." The voice told him to remove his sandals, for the ground was holy. Moses obeyed, heart pounding. The voice revealed itself as the God of his fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God said he had seen the suffering of the Hebrews in Egypt, heard their cries, and felt their pain. He told Moses he had chosen him to lead his people out of bondage and into a land of promise. Moses was overwhelmed. He doubted himself, asking, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God reassured him, promising to be with him every step of the way. Moses worried that the people would not believe him. So God gave him signs, His staff would turn into a snake, his hand would become leprous and then heal, and water from the Nile would turn to blood. Still, Moses hesitated, saying he was not eloquent. God, patient and compassionate, promised that Aaron, Moses' brother, would speak for him. The call was clear. Moses could no longer hide in the desert. He returned home and told Zipporah everything. She listened with concern and love, understanding the weight of his mission. Jethro blessed Moses, sending him off with prayers for safety and success. With his family and staff in hand, Moses set out for Egypt, the desert. Once a place of escape, was now a path of destiny. Each step was a return to his roots, a move toward the fulfillment of a promise greater than himself. Moses was no longer just a shepherd. He was a chosen leader, carrying hope for an entire people as the sun rose over the sands. Moses walked forward, guided by faith and the voice that had spoken. From the fire, the time of waiting was over. The time of deliverance was about to begin. Chapter 5. The Return to Egypt. The dawn was barely breaking when Moses gathered his few belongings. The shepherd's staff, now a symbol of something far greater, felt solid in his hand. Zipporah, with gentle eyes and a heart torn between worry and pride, helped him prepare for the journey. Kshum, still a child, sensed the tension in the air, but could not grasp the weight of his father's calling. Jethro, wise and serene, blessed Moses, praying that the God of their ancestors would go with him. The desert, which had once been Moses' hiding place, now became his road back to destiny. Each step toward Egypt was heavy with memory and expectation. Moses felt the enormity of his mission pressing on his shoulders. The voice from the burning bush still echoed in his mind, mingling awe with anxiety. He would face Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler of his time, and demand freedom for a nation of slaves. He would have to convince a weary, broken people to believe in hope again. Yet, beneath his doubts, a quiet faith grew, stronger than fear, as Moses journeyed. God spoke to him again, reminding him of the promise. Pharaoh's heart would be hard, but through signs and wonders, Egypt would come to know the power of the God of the Hebrews. Moses listened, storing every word. He was not alone. God would send Aaron, his brother, to be his companion and spokesman. The reunion was emotionally and braced Moses with tears and laughter, ready to join him in the impossible task ahead. Together, Moses and Aaron entered Egypt. The land was familiar, yet everything felt changed. They sought out the elders of the Hebrews, who gathered in secret, their faces marked by years of suffering. News of Moses' return spread quickly, stirring memories and cautious hope. Some remembered the stories of the boys saved from the Nile. Others looked on with suspicion. Moses spoke humbly, telling of God's call and showing the signs. The staff turning into a serpent, his hand becoming leprous and then healed. Slowly, hope flickered to life among the people. Their first challenge, was to stand before Pharaoh. The palace, with its towering columns and golden statues, was a place of power and intimidation. Pharaoh sat on his throne, surrounded by advisors and guards. Moses and Aaron stepped forward, their voices steady. God, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." Pharaoh's eyes narrowed. He scoffed at their demand. "Who is the Lord that I should obey him? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Pharaoh's refusal was swift and harsh. To punish the Hebrews for their insolence, he increased their burdens. No longer would the Egyptians provide straw for brickmaking. The Hebrews would have to gather it themselves, yet their daily quota would not be reduced. The people's suffering grew, and their hope faltered. Many turned on Moses and Aaron, blaming them for their increased misery. Moses, heartbroken, cried out to God, who reassured him that deliverance was still coming. Then began the signs and wonders. Moses and Aaron returned to Pharaoh, performing the miracles God had given them. The staff became a serpent, swallowing the serpents conjured by Pharaoh's magicians. Pharaoh's heart remained hard. God sent the first plague. The waters of the Nile turned to blood, killing fish and fouling the water. Yet Pharaoh would not yield. One after another, the plagues struck Egypt. Frogs swarmed over the land, filling houses and beds. Gnats arose from the dust, tormenting people and animals. Swarms of flies invaded homes and fields. Disease struck the Egyptians' livestock, but spared the Hebrews' herds. Painful boils broke out on Egyptians and their animals. Hail rained down, shattering crops and trees. Locusts devoured what remained. Darkness covered the land for 3 days, a darkness so thick it could be felt. After each plague, Pharaoh would beg for relief, only to harden his heart again once the danger passed. Through it all, Moses remained steadfast. He pleaded with Pharaoh, warned of consequences, and prayed for his people. The Hebrews watched in awe and fear as God's power was displayed. Each plague was a blow to Egypt's pride, a lesson that the God of Israel was greater than any earthly king. Finally, God announced the last and most terrible plague. At midnight, every firstborn in Egypt would die, from Pharaoh's own son to the child of the lowliest servant, even the firstborn of the animals. Moses instructed the Hebrews to sacrifice a lamb and mark their doorposts with its blood. That night, as death swept through Egypt, the houses marked with blood were spared. The Hebrews waited in silence, hearts pounding, as cries of grief rose. From every Egyptian home, before dawn, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron. His face was pale, his voice broken. "Go, leave my people, you and the Israelites, your flocks and herds, as you have said, and also bless me." The Egyptians urged the Hebrews to leave quickly, giving them silver, gold, and clothing. The people gathered their belongings, their bread still unleavened, and set out in haste. Moses led the people out of Egypt. away from slavery and into the unknown. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but the first step had been taken. The God who spoke from the fire was with them, guiding their way. Chapter 6. The Exodus, yes. Asterisk night had fallen, but no one in the Hebrew camp slept. In every home, families gathered in silence, clutching their children, eating roasted lamb and unleavened bread. The air was heavy with anticipation and the scent of a meal prepared in haste. On every door, the mark of lamb's blood stood as a silent shield, a sign of faith and hope. Moses moved quietly among the people, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the certainty of a promise about to be fulfilled. This was the night of deliverance. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Egypt was plunged into mourning. The cries of grief rose from every Egyptian house, for death had visited them in the night. Pharaoh, broken and defeated, sent for Moses and Aaron. "Leave my people," he commanded. "Go, you and the Israelites. Take your flocks and herds, as you have said, and bless me also." There was no time to lose. The Hebrews, already prepared, gathered their belongings, their bread still without leaven, their clothes girded, their staffs in hand. The Egyptians, desperate for relief, pressed gold, silver, and provisions into the hands of the departing slaves, urging them to leave quickly. The multitude was immense. Men, women, children, elders, and animals moved together. A river of people flowing out of Egypt. The road through the desert was harsh, but every step was filled with a quiet joy. Behind them lay centuries of slavery. Ahead, only the promise of a land flowing with milk and honey. Moses walked at the front, guided by faith and the memory of God's words. By day, a pillar of cloud rose above them, leading the way and shielding them from the sun. By night, a pillar of fire burned bright, lighting the darkness and warming the cold desert air. The people followed, sometimes in awe, sometimes in fear, but always moving forward. Freedom was new and strange, and the wilderness was vast and unknown. After several days camped by the shores of the Red Sea. The water stretched before them, deep and impassable, while behind them the desert seemed to close in. Suddenly, a distant rumble disturbed the calm. Pharaoh, regretting his decision, had gathered his army chariots, horses, and soldiers to pursue the fleeing slaves. The sight of the advancing army sent waves of panic through the people. Cries of fear rose. "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the desert?" Doubt and despair threatened to overwhelm the fragile hope of freedom. Moses stood firm. He listened for God's guidance, then spoke to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." God instructed Moses to stretch out his staff over the sea. As he did, a strong east wind began to blow, and the waters parted, forming walls on either side and a dry path through the sea. The people stepped forward, walking between walls of water, the seabed firm beneath their feet. The sound of the wind, the sight of the towering water, and the rush of escape filled their senses. The Egyptian army followed, charging into the path the Hebrews had taken. But as the last of the Hebrews reached the far shore, Moses stretched out his staff once more. The waters crashed back into place, swallowing the chariots and soldiers. The threat was gone. On the far shore, the Hebrews watched in stunned silence as the sea returned to calm. The power of God had saved them. Then joy erupted. Miriam, Moses' sister, took up a tambourine and led the women in song and dance. The people sang of God's triumph, of horses and riders thrown into the sea, of a God who saves and protects. The Hebrews, once slaves, now stood free on the other side of the water. The desert ahead was daunting, but hope had taken root. The journey was not easy. Soon, the people faced thirst and hunger. The desert sun was relentless, and the nights were cold. Complaints rose quickly. Memories of Egypt's food and comfort seemed sweeter than the hardships of freedom. Moses prayed, and God answered. Sweet water flowed from bitter springs. Manna appeared each morning like dew, and quails filled the camp at dusk. When thirst returned, Moses struck a rock at God's command, and water poured out for all. Each day in the desert was a lesson in trust. The people learned to depend on God for their needs, to follow where the cloud and fire led, to live as a community. Moses, their leader, listened to their complaints, taught them, and interceded for them. The wilderness was a place of testing, but also of transformation at last. The Hebrews reached the foot of Mount Sinai. The mountain loomed high, shrouded in cloud and thunder. Here, God would speak to Moses and give the people laws to shape them into a nation. But for now, they rested, their hearts full of awe and wonder at all they had seen. The Exodus from Egypt was more than an escape from slavery. It was the birth of a people, a journey from fear to faith, from oppression to hope. The desert still stretched before them, but the God who parted the sea walked with them, step by step, toward a promised land. Chapter 7. Journey through the desert. The desert stretched endlessly before the Hebrews. Vast expanse of sand and stone beneath a sky that seemed to go on forever. Each morning, the people awoke to the pale light of dawn, gathered their tents, and prepared to follow the mysterious pillar of cloud that led their way. At night, the pillar of fire burned bright, a beacon of hope and a reminder that they were not alone. Freedom was new, and the wilderness was both a promise and a test. The journey was not easy. The sun was merciless, scorching the earth and burning their skin. The nights were cold, the wind sharp, and the silence deep. Hunger and thirst became constant companions. Soon, the people began to grumble. They remembered the food of Egypt, the bread, the meat, the vegetables, and wondered if freedom was worth the hardship. Why did you bring us out here to die? They asked Moses, their voices full of fear and longing for the familiar. Even if it meant slavery, Moses felt the weight of their complaints. He walked among the people, listening to their worries, comforting the children, encouraging the elders. In his heart, he turned to God, praying for strength and guidance. Again and again, God answered. When the people thirsted, Moses struck. A rock at God's command, and water gushed forth, cool and abundant. When hunger gnawed at their bellies, God sent manna, a fine, sweet bread that appeared with the morning dew. In the evenings, quails descended on the camp, providing meat for all. Each day was a lesson in trust, a reminder that their needs would be met. Even in the harshest place, yet the people's faith wavered. There were moments of doubt, of anger, of longing for the past. Some tried to gather more manna than they needed, only to find it spoiled by morning. Others questioned Moses' leadership, asking if he had truly heard from God. Through it all, Moses remained patient, though his own spirit was often weary. He prayed for the people, pleaded for mercy, and led them forward, step by step, as the weeks turned into months. The Hebrews drew closer to a mountain that rose high above the plain Mount Sinai. The air grew tense with anticipation. When they camped at its base, thunder rumbled and lightning flashed atop the peak. A thick cloud covered the summit, and the people trembled with awe and fear. God called Moses to ascend the mountain alone. Leaving the people below, Moses climbed into the cloud, his heart pounding with reverence at the top. God spoke to Moses, giving him laws to guide the people, a covenant that would bind them together as a nation. On 2 stone tablets, God wrote the 10 Commandments, rules of justice, worship, and community. These were not just laws, but a vision for a new kind of society. One built on faithfulness, respect, and compassion. While Moses was on the mountain, the people grew restless. Fearing he would never return, they asked Aaron to make them a god they could see. Aaron gathered their gold and fashioned a calf, and the people danced and feasted around it. When Moses descended and saw what had happened, his heart broke. In anger, he shattered the tablets, confronting the people with their betrayal. Yet, even in disappointment, Moses pleaded with God to forgive them. God, in mercy, renewed the covenant, giving Moses new tablets and promising to remain with the people. The journey continued, marked by more challenges and more miracles. At times, enemies attacked, and the Hebrews had to defend themselves. At others, the people's impatience led to rebellion, and Moses had to intercede again for mercy. Through every trial, Moses grew as a leader, wise, humble, and steadfast. He taught the people, settled disputes, and reminded them of God's promises. The desert was a place of learning. The Hebrews learned to live together, to share, to forgive, and to hope. They built the tabernacle, a portable sanctuary where God's presence dwelled among them. Festivals were celebrated, sacrifices offered, and prayers lifted up. The people were no longer just former slaves. They were becoming a nation, shaped by hardship and by faith. As the years passed, a new generation grew up in the wilderness, knowing only freedom and the stories of God's power. Moses now older, looked upon them with hope and pride. He knew the journey was not just about reaching a land, but about becoming a people worthy of the promise. The desert still stretched ahead, but the Hebrews walked on, guided by the cloud, and the fire by the words of Moses, and by the faith that had been forged in adversity. The journey was not over, but the people were ready for what lay ahead. Chapter 8. Moses, leader and prophet. The desert had become more than a place of wandering. It was now a place of memory, growth, and transformation. The Hebrews, once slaves, had become a people shaped by hardship and hope, by miracles and mistakes. And at the heart of their story stood Moses. The man who had led them from bondage to the very edge of promise. Moses had grown older. His hair was white, his eyes wise and kind, his face weathered by sun and wind and years of worry and prayer. Each morning he walked among the tents, listening to the people, settling disputes, teaching the laws that God had given. He was more than a leader. He was a father, a judge, a shepherd, and a friend. The people trusted him even when they struggled to trust themselves. Life in the desert was not easy. The Hebrews faced hunger, thirst, and enemies. There were moments of rebellion, when some challenged Moses' authority or longed to return. To Egypt, there were times of fear and doubt when the future seemed uncertain and the past felt safer. Through it all, Moses stood firm. When the people sinned, he pleaded with God for mercy. When they grew discouraged, he reminded them of the miracles they had seen and the promises still ahead. The tabernacle stood at the center of the camp. It's a symbol of God's presence among his people. There, Moses would meet with God, sometimes face to face, as a friend speaks with a friend. In those sacred moments, he received wisdom, comfort, and courage. He learned that true leadership was not about power, but about service and sacrifice. As the years passed, a new generation grew up in the wilderness. They had not known slavery, but they had known hunger and thirst, battles, and miracles. Moses taught them about their history, about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, about the God who had called them out of Egypt. He told them of the covenant, the laws, the festivals, and the hope of a land flowing with milk and honey. He reminded them that their identity was not in their suffering, but in their calling. Yet Moses knew his own journey was nearing its end. One day, God called him to climb Mount Nebo, overlooking the land of Canaan. From the summit, Moses gazed out over the green valleys, the distant hills, the rivers and cities of the promised land. His heart was full of gratitude for all he had seen, of sorrow for what he would not complete, of hope for the future of his people. There, Konda Mountain, God spoke gently to Moses. He told him that he would not enter the land, but that he had fulfilled his mission. Moses blessed the people, one tribe after another, speaking words of encouragement and prophecy. He encouraged Joshua, his faithful assistant, to be strong and courageous. For he would lead the people across the Jordan. Moses' final words to the people were filled with love and urgency. He reminded them to remember all that God had done, to obey the commandments, to teach their children to choose life and blessing. He warned them against forgetting the God who had saved them, and urged them always to walk in faith and justice. When his blessings were finished, Moses climbed higher, alone. The wind whispered through the rocks, the sky stretched wide above. There, on Mount Nebo, Moses died, his spirit at peace. The Bible says that God himself buried Moses, and no one knows his grave to this day. But his legacy lived e'en in the laws he gave, in the stories he told, in the people he shaped. The Hebrews mourned their leader, but they did not lose hope. Joshua took up the mantle, and the people prepared to cross into the land promised to their ancestors. The desert was behind them, but the lessons learned would guide them forever. Moses' life was a testament to faith, courage, and humility. He had faced kings and deserts, doubts and dangers, and had trusted in a God who makes a way where there is none. His story became the foundation of a nation, a light for generations. A reminder that even in the wilderness, hope endures. And so, the journey continued not just for the Hebrews, but for all who seek freedom, justice, and the courage to follow the call of something greater. Moses, leader and prophet, remains a beacon, showing that with faith, even the longest journey leads home. Epilogue. In the hush of the desert, where the wind remembers and the stars keep their ancient watch. A people once bound in chains walk free beneath the open sky. Moses, drawn from the river's embrace, grew in the shadow of kings, yet his heart beat for justice, his spirit restless for truth. He heard the cry of the suffering, felt the weight of a call he could not ignore, and left behind the gold of Egypt for the dust of the wilderness. In the fire of the bush, he found his purpose in the staff, the power of faith. He stood before Pharaoh, unyielding, and led his people through parted waters. The desert became their teacher, the manna their daily gift, the cloud and the fire their compassin, a journey of hope and becoming on Sinai's heights. Thunder and silence, commandments etched in stone, and soul, a covenant sealed in awe and trembling, people shaped by law and love. Moses, leader and prophet, carried the burdens of many, prayed for mercy in moments of failure, taught patience, justice, and trust at the edge of promise. He gazetted the land he would not enter. His mission complete, his story song the hearts of a nation. Reborn, the Hebrews crossed over, carrying the memory of miracles, the wisdom of the wilderness, the legacy of a shepherd who dared to believe, and so the journey continues wherever faith meets fear, wherever hope leads the weary, wherever freedom calls the soul. For in every desert the voice still whispers, the path still opens, and the promise endures.